Winning the Way game is about what happens when old rules stop working.
I just remember having goosebumps for the entire Anthem.
This isn't pressure, this is rugby, this is a privilege.
2016, you left the shores for Paris and then stopped because of concussion.
I had my first real heavy concussion. The decision was that playing contact sport was not a very good idea, so I had to retire.
It was a moment where it was a case of, if not now, then when?
The purpose of being a father has far outweighed any other purpose I've ever had in my life.
There is nothing like a shock to the system.
But I think as South Africans, we are extremely resilient.
We don't know what the future is going to look like. Well, I'll tell you what the future looks like. It's more diversified. It's not broken. It's just different.
Welcome to Winning the Away game. Winning the Away game is about what happens when old rules stop working. Today we are speaking to Pat Lambie, one of the most trusted young leaders in South African rugby history, whose career ended early due to concussion forced at 28. He's now a successful property developer in KZN, working with the Collins Group, and enjoys family life with his wife and 3 sons in this beautiful region of South Africa. And Bruce Whitfield, who's built his career by decoding chaos. I first met Bruce on the airways of 702 many years ago. Started as a journalist and is now a global speaker, the podcast host for shows like Business Week, Financial Freedom Pod, and the Think Big series. He's also author with published books like It's About Time, The One Thing, and Genius, How to Thrive on the Edge of Chaos. In this episode, we explore how decisions get made when outcomes are unclear, what identity loss feels like when you arrive too early or too late, or how to rebuild confidence and direction without certainty. Flip, are you ready?
Justina's great guest we have today, the kid wonder, Pat Lambie himself, and the voice that kept me awake many mornings on the N1, Bruce Whitfield. I'm so excited to have you guys. Bruce, Pat, welcome. Where are you guys joining us from?
You first. Go on. I'll be polite this time, for once.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, Justinas. And Flip, I am joining you guys from the north coast of KZN.
Lovely, Bruce.
And I'm in London in a gentleman's club. You know what gentleman's clubs are like. I'm not wearing a tie. I'm wearing a jacket at the moment. They're very, very serious places. And I must just show you because it's such a cool space. There's my desk. So clubs aren't all what they used to be. This one is called the Homegrown Club, and it's full of entrepreneurs and amazing people who, once we're done here, I'm going to go and meet and bully to come to a talk I'm giving here tonight. So yeah, it's in central London at the moment.
Absolutely wonderful. It's good to be all over. We can see Pat is in the lovely east coast of South Africa. The only one not wearing a jersey.
Not in minus 22 like me. Yeah, exactly.
So we have a little tradition on the podcast where we start, and we have to tell us your best Springbok moment. And normally we say bar 1995 with Pat, who would be bar Ellis Park and the All Blacks. Bruce, what is your favorite Springbok memory?
My favorite Springbok memory is Rassie Erasmus in 2019 asked, what is pressure? And how did you cope with the pressure? And he said, this isn't pressure, this is rugby, this is a privilege. And he said, pressure is living in South Africa, pressure is not having a job in South Africa. And that moment of clarity and that moment of what rugby represents more and more. I was at a party in a place called Seven Oaks, which is just southeast of London, and I heard people talking. And I went, that's weird. I heard a name recognized. I recognized the name. And the name of Lincoln Marley was mentioned. Lincoln Marley is the chief executive of a listed company, ex-Standard Bank, ex-communist. He was the first proper communist I met when I was doing a university project at Rhodes many years ago, and he was my first communist that I interviewed. It was very exciting. He's no longer a communist, just for the record. And I bumped into Lincoln on a flight between Joburg and London last year, and I said, so why are you here? What are you doing? He said, I'm bringing my rugby team over. And he is doing grassroots rugby development in the Eastern Cape, around Mdantsane. This was a team that he built, and he brought them, these youngsters, to play against Sevenoaks School, very posh school, against Brighton College, the most expensive school in the UK. And the people who were talking at this party were talking about Lincoln, they were talking about rugby, they were talking about these kids, most of whom had never been on a plane in their lives, had never left the Eastern Cape in their lives, and they were coming to stay in some very, very nice environments in the United Kingdom. And they could not have been more full of praise and more full of admiration of Lincoln and the kids. And I think that's my favorite thing about rugby, is beyond the game is what it represents and what it does, and the empowerment that it brings, the teamwork that it brings, the characters it helps form and shape into, mostly at this stage, very capable and useful young men. And more, we're seeing lots of women come through the game, and I'm sure it will develop them in terms of their ability to work as teams, their ability to represent ideas much bigger than themselves. So that's, again, it's a little bit, it's off the pitch. Pat's going to be much more interesting than mine, because he, of course, remembers blood and guts and black eyes and stuff.
I think Pat mostly avoided all those, but Pat, interesting to hear your favorite Springbok memory.
He's too pretty. He's too pretty for pain. So yeah.
I tried hard to avoid all of the gruesome affairs that the rugby field offers. Flip, I left that up to you. My favorite memory is probably Joel Stransky kicking the drop kick at Ellis Park in 1995. That's one of my standout memories in my childhood. Obviously, only being small and young at the time, but that's what childhood dreams are made of, to one day be in a position to also kick a winning drop goal against the All Blacks. And it sort of ties into a memory I had firsthand, I guess. Was my first ever test for the Springboks was against the All Blacks in Port Elizabeth in 2011, just before the Rugby World Cup. And the national anthem that day was sung extremely loudly. Well, certainly it felt that way to my ears. And I just remember having goosebumps for the entire anthem, and all of the childhood memories of watching the Springboks against the All Blacks, including Joel Stransky's drop goal, running through my memory or through my mind as we stood there and sang the national anthem to face the All Blacks for the first time. So those are my two standout memories.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
Memory, a game we won as well, Pat.
Yeah. That was fantastic.
Wow, it's one of the night memories, hey?
But isn't it amazing, Pat? I mean, you were 5 years old when Joel Stransky kicked that drop goal in 95, how that manifested in your life and came full circle and became a reality. I get goosebumps just thinking about that.
Yeah, it certainly helped that my brother and I had the videotape of the whole 95 World Cup. And it was one of like a handful of videotapes that we had growing up. So it was top of the pile always. Watched it hundreds of times. But yeah, certainly very special that it manifested into reality, I guess, my dreams.
My best rugby claim to fame is I slept through the Rugby World Cup in 1995.
Wow.
I was doing overnight shifts at Reuters at the time in London, and I was doing 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., and I'd done a Friday 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I went home, fell asleep, woke up, got on the train, and going through Earl's Court, just having mad South Africans running around, and suddenly realizing I've just missed the biggest event in history since the 1994 elections, of course. But yeah, it was an astonishing moment, and how that grabbed the world, and how rugby keeps grabbing the world. I mean, it's that whole sense of South Africa being the only country to have won the World Cup 4 times and to have won it in succession in recent years, and what rugby brings together, and how rugby has transformed in the most beautiful and natural way, and how South Africans own rugby. And how it is now, the Springbok jersey, once derided by Trevor Manuel, famously wearing the All Black jersey to Parliament, or some sort of symbol of the All Blacks to Parliament, because they didn't represent him. And now rugby being so representative and being this most magnificent unifier in a country that needs it. So yeah, it's been bloody fantastic.
Bruce, you know what's amazing to me is I actually, after the 23 World Cup, I became a little obsessed with trying to figure out what it would take for South Africa to win 5 of the next 10 World Cups. And in that search and journey, I ended up meeting Lincoln. And I don't know if he's ever told you the story of how he decided, or why he decided to because he grew up being an All Black supporter. And since the 2023 World Cup, he's actually decided to become a full-blown Springbok supporter. And it's such a fascinating story when he tells it. And he really starts with, like, even Nelson Mandela trying to convince his peers in 95 to become Springbok supporters, and he didn't. And he said the two main reasons he decided to become a Springbok supporter now is, one, he saw his son grow up and be a full-blooded Springbok supporter with none of the baggage he carried. And he saw Rassie really transforming rugby in a meaningful way in the last 6-7 years. And now he's become a full-blown Springbok supporter. We actually went to the Australia game together last year. What he's doing for rugby in the Eastern Cape is just absolutely mind-blowing.
And you look at all the talents that South Africa's missed out on for generations, and you just go, and by doing it, one, it's a wonderful gesture, but also it's creating pipelines and it's creating real talent for the future. So that is the secret sauce that keep feeding the machine.
Yeah. Speaking of talent, Pat Lambie, probably one of the best that grazed the fields of South Africa from a very young age. And yeah, I can say it out loud, tragically cut short for South Africans. I think you still in as good enough nick to still play and should have been part of all that. 2016, you left the shores for Paris, step into a racing metro team that won everything and anything, played alongside my brother back in the day, and then stopped because of concussion. Take us a little bit through that journey, and you decided to go back to South Africa without much hesitation. Take us a little bit through that period of your life.
Yeah, 2016, I had my first real heavy concussion, and sort of my journey began trying to shake off symptoms for the rest of my career, really. And 2017, I had an opportunity to join racing, and I thought, you know what, this is going to be a wonderful opportunity to break the cycle potentially and play in a different jersey for a different club in a completely different competition. You know, I could have a whole new psychology around rugby and hopefully have a whole second half of my career. So I had a wonderful 2 seasons at racing, but unfortunately I didn't avoid a few more head injuries. And in the end, after seeing doctors in France, the UK and South Africa, and taking on all the advice that I could, the decision was that playing contact sport was not a very good idea. And so I had to retire. At that point in time, we'd found out that my wife, Kate, was pregnant with our first child. And so it was quite easy to make the decision to move back to South Africa. It was always our plan after spending 5, 6, 7 years playing overseas. The plan was always to come back to South Africa. And obviously, once rugby was taken away, there was nothing else really keeping us away from home and away from family. And with a newborn baby, we obviously wanted to be close to family and friends. And so, yeah, I basically came home 6 weeks after my son was born and started a whole new chapter and a whole new life.
Are you allowed to play rugby?
Yes. I've got 3 boys now, a lot of water under the bridge since those days, and they're all allowed to play whatever sports they would like to play, including rugby. So even though I didn't end on my terms, I still had an amazing time as a professional player. I loved the sport. I still love the sport. I love watching it, especially the Springboks over the last few years. And so my boys, I would encourage them to play all sports and rugby.
That's awesome, man. So, Bruce, for you, when and how did the decision come to say, okay, I want to write the next chapter in my life somewhere else?
Yeah, it was completely by accident. I mean, 12 months before we moved to the UK, and goodness knows how long that lasts, but we bought a big fat new car, had just finished renovations on a house and bought a puppy. And that's settling. That's adult stuff. A year later, we decided to not send my son to my old school for various reasons, and he wanted to try a boarding school, and we heard of a school in the south of London that was looking for swimmers. He's a national South African swimmer, very talented swimmer, and so he applied for a spot, went for a term, came back drawn and gaunt at the age of 14, went on holiday, and we said to him, right, you're ready to come back? Your headmaster at your old school has kept your place? And he said, no, I like it. I'm exhausted and I'm broken, but they're pushing me. They're making me work hard. I'm learning things. And we went, well, if you want to do that, then we'll come a bit closer. And it coincided quite nicely because I was ready to finish on the radio. I'd done it for more than 20 years. I'd had a hugely privileged run with it. And I could have kept on doing it for ages, but I was kind of I felt myself becoming a little bit complacent. And I thought, how do I ramp up what I do? And I need to have a little bit of fear, a little bit of the burning platform. And so I thought, well, if I don't do it now, a couple of years' time, I'll be more risk averse and I won't do it. So let's go and jump into the fire. Within 6 months, the puppy had been boxed up and sent to my sister who lives in another part of Surrey. The car had been sold at a huge loss. The house was on the market because it was too tender to rent out and too many good memories there. And the next thing, we arrived in a place we'd never been to and said, right, let's find a house. Let's see how this works out. And so I wish I could say that after years of telling people about planning, how important it is to consider things and to carefully weigh up these decisions that you take, these life-changing decisions, it was a moment where it was a case of, if not now, then when? And nothing is undoable. And I've spent 99% of my life in South Africa. It is very much part of my DNA. Lots of ancestors buried in weird and wonderful places all over the country. And my kids are, their blood is green. And whenever the Springboks come within a 20-mile radius, the hassle starts. And so there is very much a close connection. And I worked out the other day, I've spent 37% of time in the last 2.5 years out of the United Kingdom, most of it in South Africa, sometime in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, doing various things. But the decision to move. And a lot of people, and I think 20 years ago, moving countries was a little bit like losing a limb. I don't think it's like that anymore. I think we're far more flexible. They're very convenient and easy bus rides that go. Just this weekend, for example, I leave on Saturday night, land on Sunday, do a big event on Monday, back on a plane on Monday night to be back in London for something on Wednesday. Because you can. And so, sorry, planet, I know I'm a bad person, I'll plant some trees, but the convenience of global travel and connectivity is amazing.
That is quite incredible, Bruce. And the green fields of south of London is a far cry from Viljoensgryn, where we just spoke earlier, where you grew up with your brown school shoes, to identify you.
Exactly.
But surely, and there's a big narrative between, say with Pat and with myself and Justina's that started over in Canada as well. When you have to rebuild, you had a very good identity in South Africa. Everyone knew, without saying his name, when the golden voice came on the radio, we knew it's Bruce Whitfield. What is the process that you go through to rebuild that Bruce Whitfield?
It's a never-ending process, and that complacency was the thing that I was really worried about, because I morphed in the last decade into, yes, doing the radio show and doing some stuff on TV, but more and more writing books and then using the lessons out of those books to convert into professional speaking opportunities. And people would phone up my agent and say, is Bruce available next Wednesday? And she'd say, what would you like him to talk about? Oh, whatever it feels like talking about. And I would turn up and people would generally, nobody would throw up, nobody died, it was fine. And so it was really comfortable. It was so easy. And what a privilege, an incredible privilege that was. That platform gave profile that I could never have dreamed of. Watching my father as an AI practitioner in the Free State in the 1970s. AI was a big thing in the 70s. Artificial insemination. And it's the reason why I do what I do, because my earliest memory, and I can smell the dust now, I was sitting in my dad's Hilux watching as he and some very big-eyed cows were standing underneath these 3 blue gum trees next to a reservoir on the Vlaktes. There's nothing else anywhere in the background. The Groenebloem grain silos in the distance are the nearest landmark. And my old man is elbow deep inside a cow, trying to find the cervix and trying to insert a straw of imported bull semen. You never had this on this podcast before. Imported from the Petworth estate in Sussex, so that he can get the best cattle he could possibly get. And I looked at that, and I listened to a guy called Jeremy Dawes talking on the radio, and I went, I'm going to do that rather than that, because I'm not doing to that cow what my father is doing to that cow. And yeah, at the age of 5 or 6, I made a decision to always go, to go into broadcasting, because it sure as hell beat working, that's for sure. But yeah, having that presence and that brand was an astonishing thing. It was absolutely wonderful. And I continued to serve that market with the News 24 podcast called Bruce Whitfield's Business Week. And there's we cut right to the chase of half an hour of business news. That's all you need to know. Just if you listen to this, you'll be fine, sort of thing. You don't need to worry yourself about the noise in the world. And that keeps me very tied to South Africa, the relationships there. The books I've written have all had drawn on the brilliance of South Africa, the ingenuity of South Africans, the talent of South Africans, and how many of those have exported that talent around the world because they play the away game, as well as the Springboks, as well as you guys have played the away game. South African business leaders have played the away game. And the lessons drawn from South Africa, from the 89th hardest place on earth to do business, according to the IMF, it makes you tough, it makes you resilient, it makes you incredibly creative. Not everybody succeeds in the away game, but those that do incredibly well at it.
Wow, that's awesome, Bruce. And what I really liked about that is also the manifestation of going into radio from the age of 5. Like Pat manifested kicking a winning score against the All Blacks, you manifested ending up on radio.
If you have no talent, you go onto radio. If you have a talent and you can cultivate it, you play rugby with the Springboks. I mean, it's two different things, you see.
I'm just impressed. Jeremy Dawes was allowed. English radio was allowed for Villiers-Green again. That's it's news for me.
They tried to stop it, but there were lots of us, believe it or not. There was always the joke. I think Villiers-Green's registration plate was OMF and Bothaville was OMB, and OMB was Ons Miliboere, and OMF was Our Maize Farmers, because we're quite a big community of English speakers.
Bruce, I spent a lot of my time on a very small town not far away from Villiers-Green called Leeudoringstad. So I know the asthmatic feeling of maize, of what do you call it, broken maize in the air. Pat, you're in property now. Was that always part of the plan, or was that sort of an emergency stop? How did you work yourself, and how did you shape your competencies towards moving into the property sector?
Flip, my dad has been in the property development and broking game for as long as I can remember, over 30 years now. So it's always been part of the dinner table conversation. He's run his own business, most of my life. And so whilst I was playing, I did some studying and some work experience with another property development business, that being with the group that I now work for. It just felt like it was the natural progression. I hadn't really hung my hat on it until I absolutely had to. And yeah, when I no longer could play rugby, I jumped straight into a new career almost as quickly as I could. I wanted to grow. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to be successful in something completely different to professional sport. And luckily for me, I had opened the door, made the connection at least with the Collins Group whilst I was still playing. And they were the first people I phoned when the day I retired came about. And they said, yes, come along. Don't know what you're going to do for us, but we'll try and find something and let's see how we go. And a few months of an internship led to a permanent position, and we're now almost 7 years down the line. And it's been a very cool journey. And I know, speaking to my other ex-teammates, how transitioning from playing sport into the working world is really, really hard. And it was very hard for me as well. But one thing that I'm so grateful for is that I have chosen an industry and a career that I can see myself staying in for many more years to come. And I haven't had to chop and change and bounce around and try and find my feet or find the thing that is going to keep me motivated or get me out of bed in the morning to go to work. I feel like I I'm very lucky to have found that straight away. In hindsight, I think if I'm brutally honest, I would have done things a little bit differently. As I mentioned earlier, I was so keen to put rugby behind me and move on to something new and make a success of a new career, that I don't think I took enough time to process everything and to come to terms with everything, and to just give myself and my family, for that matter, a little bit of time to breathe and reflect and mourn and be thankful for, for all the happy memories. I probably, if I had it all over again, would have taken a 3 to 6 month sabbatical, a long extended family holiday, done some traveling, or just kick my feet up on a beach for a few months, just to let things all settle, and then crack on and dive into a new career. But it is what it is, and I'm really grateful that here we are now.
But it's when you leave something and it's not on your terms. I mean, this wasn't that wasn't the plan for you, and so now you cross and worried because suddenly the future is not as you'd mapped it out, and so therefore Plan B better come down quickly because people will forget me. How could they forget you? But it's that fear of being forgotten and losing relevance. And while you've still got some cachet, grabbing that and doing it. And so I don't think there's any right or wrong way. But when it's not on your terms, you make a plan and make a plan fast. And I wonder. And here, I've got a pet theory, and you guys can help correct me here. I've set somebody on this project because I'm too lazy to do it. Who are the best people to hire in terms of professional sports people? I mean, golfers, you can't hire them because they're allowed to play until they're 90. I chatted to Gary Player the other day, and he's still playing. So they're never available. Tennis players are very individualistic. They might do a bit of doubles. Rowers, they sit in straight rows and do as they're told. Cricketers, nice guys. Are they great hires? My feeling, and it's a pet project of mine, to try and prove that people who make the transition best out of professional sport into the workplace are rugby players, because it's rough, it's brutal, it's confrontational. But I've watched people like John Robbie and Nick Mallett interacting, and they had a big argument at the age of 17 between Oxford and Cambridge, and they still argue about it today. And both of them believes the other one is wrong, but they're the best of mates. And they get over stuff really quickly. They can disagree really vociferously. And I wonder if what's learnt on the rugby field, Pat, translates into the workplace. And you're going to be biased on this, so it's fine. But I think rugby translates to work better than most other sports. Idea? Theory? Does it hold?
I do agree. It's a life subject of mine as well to show the importance, or show the value that rugby players can add to the society after rugby. It's a sport that we love, and not everyone has the ability or the need to go and do coaching or commentary afterwards. Some of us do want to set new objectives and a new purpose and try and accomplish new tasks. And we recently spoke to Schalk Brits as well, and he said, the first time you get to do a discounted cash flow, you want to be the best, because that's who we are as rugby players. You go out and you want to be the best number 10 that there is on that day, and you want to win no matter your size or shape. You want to be the best, but you're 15 years behind the guy that's been doing it all the time. So you're catching up again. So it's it's unlike military, where you have these programs where they put cotton wool all around you and streamline you up onto the top, and then yes general, you're the best, and then the sport players, and we just have to prove ourselves again. But luckily we're tough, and Pat, I want to get back to yourself. You said a very interesting thing there. In retrospect, you wanted to take some time off. What was the toughest thing for you to reshape that purpose? So as rugby players, we admit that we get spoon-fed. You wake up on a Sunday, you get your program, from 8 o'clock on a Monday to the game on a Saturday. You know exactly hour by hour what you're going to do. How did you go? What was your key measures, or what are you still working on to regain that purpose?
Yeah, Flip, that's so true. And Bruce, maybe to acknowledge what you've just said, thank you that you think so highly of us rugby players, but we do have our downfalls.
Evidence suggests it's true. Yeah, sure.
Look, I think we understand how we've had to be involved in the team environments and close confines. We've had to travel and share rooms with players or with other people. We've had to work as a team, understand individual strengths and weaknesses. We all have our role to play on the field, and that can certainly, in the business world and certainly in the property development world, we've got to interact with architects and QSs and engineers and town planners and environmental consultants and project managers, and you've got to be able to pull the whole team together, all leading or going in one direction so that you can move a project forward and deliver on it. But to Flip's point, we do get spoon-fed and expect everything to be laid out on a plate in front of us, which can be a downfall. And Flip, I think that's also something that players struggle with in the transition from the sporting world or the rugby world into normal world, is that now you've got to manage your own time. You've got to decide when you're going to wake up, when you're going to exercise, when you're going to go to work, how you're going to fit family life into that. Obviously, it's a little bit harder if the company you work for dictates you must be there from 8 to 5 or from 9 to 4, whatever it is. But for me, it's never been a corporate role. It's always been rather flexible, in the office some days, on site other days, working from wherever a few times a week. But what was very easy for me to be motivated by, and I think it was such a big blessing, was that my rugby career ended and my family life started almost immediately thereafter. And now the purpose of being a father has far outweighed any other purpose I've ever had in my life, and the motivation to provide for my family and be the best father that I possibly can be, and obviously give everything that my family wants and needs to them, has been a big motivating factor to have a successful career outside of rugby and to be able to make ends meet with a new job and in a new career outside of rugby. So that's where I am, and I still am motivated by that. I still am driven to go deep and long and far into this property development world. And at the moment, all is going well.
I imagine having 3 boys, that's also why you need a bit of holiday.
What was fascinating for me, I mean, I was a diehard Blue Bull supporter. So 1990, when you were born, probably around the same time, was the first time the Sharks won the Currie Cup. And unfortunately, I was there that day in Loftus. But as a young player,
I was probably a year or two later at Ellis Park to see Natal beat Transvaal in the Currie Cup. That was also good, yeah. So,
Justinus, my parents nearly called me Val. Val was the Sharks captain at the time. It was a consideration. The nurses suggested they called me Val.
Oh, no, Val Bartman, no way.
Johnson, that scored the tries against the Bulls.
Yeah. And Theo van Rensburg tried to tackle him high and missed it. And then Jannie Engelbrecht jumped on his back and got a penalty, and Joel Stransky kicked it over. But in any case, that was a very sad day in South African rugby history for me, obviously. 2007 was definitely the chance to get it back. But you as a player, what was amazing about you is you always just looked so confident. I mean, you were super young, you weren't that big, but it never looked like any of those things intimidated you. How did you feel like you were able to transfer that confidence from rugby into your new career and from rugby into fatherhood? Or was there points in that transition where you felt like, oh, shucks, I don't know what I'm doing? Or was the confidence came naturally in these new contexts as well?
That's a good question. I certainly wasn't confident all the time. There were obviously dips in my career where I was lacking some confidence. But I think I've always been lucky to have fairly calm demeanor, I guess. And I don't easily get too flustered or too flattered for that matter. So, try not to have these big spikes of emotions and feelings, especially when you're out on the field and having to make decisions the drop of a hat. I think the pressure of the rugby environment, particularly the 80 minutes that you're on the field, the decision-making process then is a lot more intense than it is in the business world. I think in the business world, you have more time to think things over and plan and strategize and get information that you need in order to make a decision. But the pressure in the business world is obviously a lot more on the financial side of things. So the decisions that you make can have huge financial implications. And that pressure I've felt is different to the pressure of being a player. Obviously, indirectly as a player, if you keep making rubbish decisions and performing poorly, then financially that's going to have a negative outcome on you, because you're going to get dropped and you're going to get left out of squads and you're not going to get re-signed in a contract and blah, blah, blah. But as a player, you're just trying to be the best version of yourself. And it's a passion and it's a love, and it's not as much of a job as it is a career in sport. So I'm not really sure if I've answered your question. I think one of the great things that sport has taught me is how to handle pressure and decision making, and how to deal with various opinions and various egos, and to make an informed decision and to not be too erratic with things.
That's a very good point, and especially around the egos. Bruce, you've interviewed some.
Well, how the egos, Bruce? Sorry, hurt my feelings.
There was a comma. You've interviewed some of the biggest personalities and therefore the biggest egos we've known. How do you manage to in those heated discussions to remain completely Switzerland, completely neutral, and not let your own opinion? That's always for me, for any radio personality or TV or podcast personality. That's the biggest strength, is to remain completely neutral.
No, you don't. You can't be neutral. We all are triggered by different things. Again, growing up in Viljoenskroon, there's a value set that comes from growing up, I think, in a more traditional environment. You get a very clear sense of what is right and what is wrong, a very clear sense of justice in the world. And if you have a strong sense of personal values and you understand how you see the world, and you believe very firmly that the world is better today than it was 20 years ago, and is better than it was 100 years ago and 500 years ago, and your role is to make it better 20 years from now, you have a clear understanding of the sorts of behaviors and the sorts of actions that people with a huge amount of power and authority, how they need to behave. And it's okay to be angry when they're behaving badly. So I went through a very angry 10 years between about 2008 and 2018 during the Zuma years, for example. The rage I felt. And I was reminded the other day of the night Nhlanhla Nene was fired as finance minister, and Gautrain was fairly new, and I just got onto the Gautrain, and there'd been lots of rumors during the week that he was going to be fired. And as I got onto the Gautrain, and on Sandton Station in those days, you could get an SMS, but then you went into the tunnel and you couldn't get one until you got to Marlborough, once your phone had decided to talk to the network again. I think it's changed now. But my producer sent me a message just after 8 o'clock. I just got off the radio. I was flying back down to Cape Town. And she went, he's done it. He's fired Nene. And I had to spend the next 3 minutes looking at this going, and the rage. And that night I wrote the strongest opinion piece on my phone, sitting in economy on SAA 375 or 219 or whatever it was, and just the fury I felt. And I woke up the news editor at 7:02 and said, look, I don't know if you want to publish this thing, but I've written it. Please do publish it. And it went absolutely stratospheric the next day, because it was the voice of absolute rage at how dare this economically illiterate, incompetent, thieving person do this to an economy that's already on its knees. And at that point, I felt completely justified in taking a fairly strong view without using those expletives. And I think part of being a journalist is having a very clear sense of social justice and what is right and wrong, and batting for it. And I think that becomes dangerous when it's weaponized, either from the left or from the right. And so, yeah, objectivity is a myth. That was journalism on day one in 1989 at Rhodes University. Objectivity is a myth, so hold your values dear, be true to those values, represent those values, and try not to get personally involved, of course. But there have been times where I have had really intimate conversations with CEOs who are not my friends. I like them very much. I respect most of them very much, but we don't have I don't know what upsets their wives about them. I can guess in many cases, but it's not that kind of relationship. But it is a relationship of mutual respect where they've risen to a level of extraordinary capability. But often they're people who work in very narrow silos. So you've got chartered accountants, and they sort of go out of the silos, and so they appreciate a little bit of honest feedback and a little bit of conversations based in integrity. And there are some enormously big egos. Some of them are completely justified. There was some of them are misplaced. But my favorite story on ego in business, and then I'll stop for a second. He died recently, but Brian Gilbertson, big mining CEO, instrumental in global mining for many years. And I think he lived on the ridge in Westcliff, which is 10 minutes to downtown Joburg, maybe 15 if there was a bit of traffic. But he used to go by helicopter. And the helicopter would come and pick him up in his garden. He would then land on the roof. It probably took him longer to get into the helicopter, to take off, to go over downtown Joburg, land on the roof, to get in the lift and down to his office than if he'd driven. But the line always was, whenever he landed on the building, the ego has landed. So yes, there are people who have big personalities, of course, and sometimes destructive egos, but generally I find many business leaders are simply people really clever, really good at what they do, able to get teams of people to do what they need to do to achieve goals, in the same way as when you've got great leadership in sport, they're better leaders in some respects than others. And those who have got great values and a bigger sense of purpose, which is a word that's overused nowadays, will ultimately be on the sports field, in the boardroom, will be the ones who are going to be most successful over time.
That's a great story. Thanks for sharing, Bruce. Bruce, you mentioned a bit earlier that one of the latest books you written is...
this one?
That one, About Time, yeah. Tell us a little bit about it. That's such a great... So I have this insane affinity for Nando's, and I think part of the reason I have is when I left South Africa and I landed in Canada, one of the first things we did from the Calgary airport is go to Nando's. So I've always liked the food, but at that point, Nando's became this connection to South Africa and this example of a South African business who's done almost better outside of South Africa than in South Africa. So tell us a little bit about that and what for you is winning the away game, and with that as obviously a great example.
I can't say Nando's and then not get a Robbie Brosen story. I have to go to tell you one quickly. During the first Trump administration, it was toward the end of Zuma, and as Trump was coming in, and I was walking through domestic departures at Ora Tambo, and the next thing, Robbie Brosen, and if you don't know Robbie personally, but you do know the story of Winnie the Pooh, most South Africans are Eeyore. Robbie Brosen is Tigger, and he's permanently he's on Red Bull and extra sugar and stuff, and he's always optimistic and enthusiastic, and he comes running up to, are we allowed to swear on this podcast? I'm quoting Robbie, so it's not me swearing. And he came bounding over to me and he went, "The world's fucked, hey?" Big smile on his face. And he was just like, now South Africa doesn't look so cuck with that oak. Oh, it's great. And South Africa was going through its transition, and it's failed to grasp the opportunity that the end of Zuma brought, but to the extent that it should have. But that sense of Robbie and that enthusiasm, and the fact that Nando's has got, 1,500 outlets now, it's gradually spreading through the United States. Don't tell Donald Trump. And it's not Mexican, so it'll be fine. But he doesn't know where Mozambique is, so that's okay. So the chilies will still be allowed to go in. So Robbie is an exceptional South African, and I mean they got to 800 stores worldwide, and it was about 2008, and Robbie I think had just been pushing himself too hard, and he just went, it was time for adult supervision, and the rate of growth has slowed dramatically since then. But I think they're up to about 1,500 stores. They're 500 in the 500 in the UK, 380 or something in South Africa. It's a magnificent story. But anyway, on to this one, which is the story of time, which has got its origins in an MBA classroom at Gibbs in the year 2000. And a guy called Koenraad Jonker, who had graduated cum laude from the University of the Free State in law, was CEO of what was then Edward Nathan Friedland. It's now ENS, big corporate law firm, biggest in Africa. And at age 35, he's running this law firm, all these partners, they're all hungry deal makers. At the time, Edward Nathan is owned by Nedbank because they sold it to Nedbank, and Kun bought it back from Nedbank for less than Nedbank had paid for it 5 years before. And Kun started doing his MBA and started thinking very heavily about financial inclusion, about the base of the pyramid, about people who are ignored by banks. And some 24% of people in the world can't get a bank account because they're seen as unbankable. Commercial banks have got very high cost bases, they've got big pillars to pay for, they've got big data sets to pay for. It's very expensive to run big banks. And started thinking about this and retired from law, resigned from his law job, and went and joined Standard Bank and ran a business for them inside Standard Bank, which Sim Chabalala, the CEO of Standard Bank, now says it was impossible. We couldn't have a cult inside a bank because these guys were absolute rebels. They were complete renegades. They broke all of the rules. They had like a skunk works inside a Standard Bank that nobody really knew about. And they were going to spaza shops and using Blackberries to sign up customers and breaking rules. Oh, it was chaos. But they signed up 1 million customers. And suddenly somebody in Standard Bank woke up and went, this is getting a bit big. Actually, we need to put costs to it because it's not fair to corporate banking that these guys don't have the same level of costs, and basically undermined the business model, and it became a product rather than a set. So he left there, joined Deloitte. They signed up 5 million customers for MTN and created a banking business for MTN. MTN went, well, it doesn't sell airtime, so we don't want this. So they were bought by Commonwealth Bank of Australia, and that's where Commonwealth Bank of Australia had this big Southeast Asia business, and they loved the tech that Time had created and wanted to use that tech to expand their Southeast Asia business. But they got into trouble in Australia and basically said to Koen Jonker, who was then a senior executive at Commonwealth Bank of Australia, said to him, you can have a cushy job for as long as you want in Sydney. He has a big contract. He has a pay packet. You'll be fine. And the next 28 generations of Jonkers will be fine. You can have that. But you have to get rid of this little thing called time. And Koen went to his old executive team and said, why don't we buy it back? And got the backing of Patrice Motsepe at African Rainbow Capital. And so giving up cozy life in Sydney and went on the road to try and build a bank from scratch, but in the cloud only, getting a banking license, which had been done by Commonwealth Bank of Australia. They were absolutely pivotal in that part, but convincing regulators that they should be allowed to continue. Getting the backing of Patrice Motsepe and building the business in South Africa. And if you want to know about winning the away game, I think the story of Time is the quintessential winning the away game story, because you hone your skills, you hone your systems, you hone your processes, you hone your value system in South Africa. You then transpose that in a country 6 time zones away, in a culture that is so remote from yours. But you do it using the same techniques and strategies that you used in South Africa. So they teamed up with the Gokon Way family, which is one of the 10 wealthiest families in the Philippines. And they've got a big supermarket group. So they're tied up like they do with Pick and Pay and with Foschini Group stores in South Africa, with Robinson supermarkets in the Philippines, where they've got 8 million customers now, on top of the 12 million in South Africa. They're lending money in Indonesia. Their tech stacks are being built by a guy I was at university with at Rhodes many years ago, ex-Standard Bank as well, called Dieter Botha, who lives in Sydney but runs a team in Vietnam of 800 techies. And this is a law graduate from the University of the Free State, and a guy who did proper AI, not like my father's AI in the 90s, called Sjoerd van der Walt, who's got a PhD in AI from those days. But these two Afrikaans guys who have seen a market that is ignored, that is not respected, that is unloved, and they said, how can we serve them with dignity and purpose and clarity and profitably? And how do we raise the money in order to do that? They went through all kinds of hell in COVID. We go through the details in the book. They come very close to death at least 5 or 6 times. Yet they are, the core team of people are united in a sense of purpose that I've not seen in any other business I've ever studied. And I've studied hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs over 25 years. And they've got a business which is now headquartered in Singapore, with operations in the Philippines, growing in Indonesia, new markets in sight, and of course the core sitting in South Africa, which is teamed up now with Sanlam, because Patrice, from many years ago, did the first big BE deal with Sanlam that still holds and is probably the most successful BE deal in South African history. And so you're going to have Time and Sanlam working together. Old Mutual's just launched a bank. You've got Discovery with a bank. ShopRite wants a bank. Everybody wants a bank. And you've still got the mainstream banks, which are enormously powerful and influential and profitable. And yeah, so what South Africa does really well is banking. And this has taken banking to a new level in terms of time. And time comes from take your money everywhere. But this is a South African creation. Their value proposition was slightly different in the Philippines, marketed a slightly higher demographic. They're going to rebrand very soon in South Africa, become far more visible, far more aspirational, because nobody wants to bank with a poor person's bank. And they first made it the poor person's bank, and they've gone, that's actually not very good. Banking is always aspirational. And yeah, so these guys are winning the away game in the same way as Nando's wins the away game, the same way as Discovery with 2 million Vitality customers, insurance customers in the UK, the same way as so many South African businesses. 91, the old Investec Asset Management, Investec itself, phenomenal South African businesses are doing so well, largely in the UK, but increasingly in other parts of the world too, where you take real hunger, real business cases, and you transpose those into new markets. I mean, the Rolex guys, for example, were on the bones of their backside in South Africa, and I hope they're still doing well in the US, but they found a good market for superlative lawnmowers in the US, for example. There's so many great stories about it, about South Africans winning at away games in sports fields and, of course, in the corporate sector too.
That is an incredible story, and on the time, I'm a big fan of Cheslin Jacobs, the new CEO, for the very fact that he posted a photo and he was wearing a Casio watch, just to show you can be in big banking and just be normal.
So my favorite Cheslin story, and he's a cocky little bugger. He's not that little, but he's cocky as hell. So he joined when they were all part of Standard Bank and has been part of the core team that left Standard Bank and went by Deloitte and Commonwealth Bank of Australia and all over the place. And one of the first things they did when they launched in 2019, they put a billboard in Rosebank directly across within eye line of Sim Chabalala's office, the CEO. And Sim is unflappable. Sim doesn't get agitated about anything, but apparently he admits to being quite cross about that because the billboard went, banking shouldn't be standard. Get a TymeBank account. And the only time Kun Jonker has worn a tie in the last 10 years was having to go and apologize to his old boss at Standard Bank. And they've remained very good friends. But yeah, the story of Time is one of cheek, it's one of opportunism, and it's one of serving a market that is largely ignored.
Just as we move towards the end, and Pat, before you have to go jump off and market those lovely properties in the KwaZulu-Natal Midlands. Why do you reckon South Africans are so successful at winning the away game? And as you go in that, what is the next 10 years? What is winning for Pat look like?
Flip, I think as South Africans, we are extremely resilient. We are a tough nation. We are so diverse with many different skill sets, but we are all extremely resilient. And I think we've got loads of opportunity within South Africa, and we grow up and develop skills to take advantage of those opportunities. And we can, as Bruce has mentioned, now then translate the skills that we've learned here anywhere in the world. And so it really is wonderful that there are so many happy, wonderful stories of South African businessmen and businesses that are winning their away game all around the globe. And then the second part of your question, what does it look like for me over the next little while? Look, I'm extremely optimistic about where South Africa is going. I'm extremely optimistic in particular about the KZN North Coast and the development that is happening here and the areas that are being transformed into real pockets of excellence and bubbles that people from all over the country and from outside of South Africa are wanting to come and live in. And so, I see 10, 15, maybe even 20-year pipeline of development work out here on this north coast of the KZN province. And we are going to attract foreign investment, and we are going to create something that is quite unique and special, that offers wonderful climate all year round, warm sea, great services and infrastructure, and everything that you need within a 5 or 10 minute neighborhood. Schools, healthcare, shopping, entertainment, business opportunities. And we're going to rival other first world countries and other pockets of South Africa, at the moment boast a first world experience.
Only place you can swim in the sea in July. Absolutely.
Yeah, why not?
I've got 2 boys, so, apparently there's quite a few schools over there, maybe keep a spot for me.
Correct. We'll do that for you, Flo.
Bruce, for you, what does the next 10 years look like, and what do you want to do, and how do you want to win the away game in the next few years?
You know what, I mean, and we haven't really gone there, but I think a really important part, you said you wanted vulnerability. I'll give you vulnerability, Justinas. There's nothing like, if you're a rugby star and people like rugby, you can be anybody playing anywhere, and you will be known. And when you play, people will come to watch you. I remember giving Jonty Rhodes a lift back. I know he's not a rugby player, from Sun City to Joburg. And he broke my bathroom door handle, but that's okay. Forgive you, Jonty. He got a hell of a grip, that guy. But Jonty was just talking about India and how he's more anonymous in South Africa than he was in India at the time, and the obsession with sports with stars. And I think the wonderful thing about sport is the brand recognition, the personal recognition it has, and the tragedy for so many sports people who don't leverage that wonderful brand value that they have. People like Val Bartman have done rather well. Val, I think, has bought he's bought another security company, about to list it. Yeah, they've just bought and going to list on the JSE. So he's done rather well out of leveraging his brand. And Bobby, of course, is doing very well with Elixir in the UK, and the value of him as a former Springbok captain, still strong kudos here. When you've been in media in one market, as I have for so long, and yes, it's all very comfortable and very easy, and that was that complacency that I was afraid of back then. There is nothing like a shock to the system. It's a little bit like going to swim at Clifton in July, unlike on KZN where it's nice and warm. If you really want your heart rate to get going, go and jump in the ocean at Clifton in July, which I've done. Don't recommend it.
Even in the middle of December, Bruce, it's very cold.
Exactly. But relocating, because great opportunity for kids, and you see the opportunity, and they could have gone to lovely schools in South Africa, but this was it was the thing. It was an opportunity, and the exposure that they get, and the exposure that they're getting. There are lots of Asian kids in their school, and the 10% of the school are kids who come from mainland China and Hong Kong, and it's just this most astonishing networking opportunity for a future that we don't know. But you come into a market and you go, "Hi, I'm Bruce," and they go, "Yeah, that's nice. So what?" And you go, and then they lose interest before you even finish your first sentence. It takes a huge amount of time, a huge amount of work, and a huge amount of focused ability when you are in the soft arts, if you like, of delivering a message which is absolutely pertinent to the world right now, which is, how do you thrive at the edge of chaos? How do you seize the chaos advantage? And the chaos advantage is what I talk about at the moment, which is everything I've learned out of one of the toughest markets on earth, one of the most hostile business environments on earth, is highly relevant in this market today. How do you maintain confidence? How do you read the signals as to what has changed permanently? What is an anomaly? What is an aberration? The world right now is absolutely convinced that the old world order is dead and it's all going to fall apart, and we don't know what the future is going to look like. Well, I'll tell you what the future looks like. It's more diversified. It's not broken. It's just different, and you adjust to different in the same way as, who's the scariest bloke you've ever had run at you, Pat, on the rugby field?
Probably Ma'a Nonu.
I thought it would be me.
He knows you're a teddy bear at heart, really.
It's a perfect way to end it. Thank you guys for showing up today and participating. That was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. Clip, thank you. Justinas, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much.